much has been happening on the Jamaican landscape, with issues ranging from the constitutional reform to compensation review. We discuss this and more on The Conversation with Mickel Jackson, Executive Director of the Jamaicans for Justice. Welcome to The Conversation.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
So, a lot has been happening.
Yes.
To the extent that we're not even sure where exactly we should start, because there's no one issue that's of prime importance. But it would make sense for us to look at the recent salary increases. We have not heard, I'm not sure if much has been said, especially from the point of view of Jamaicans for Justice as it relates to the salary hikes or the salary increases that was given to the political directorate. So what are your views of that? What do you have to say about it?
Generally, I like to start from a place of persons understanding the mandate of different civil society organizations and why we individually speak on different issues and why in some areas we may simply support another partner agency. When it comes to the matter of compensation, I think when we look at the issues, it spans different challenges for people. You're talking about a sense of how engaged the political directorate through the Ministry of Finance perhaps would have been with the trade unions and public sector workers. I've personally received, and through JFJ, we've received complaints from civil servants spanning the police, teachers asking for JFJ's intervention. But this is not an area that the organization works in. Where we can lend our voice and support, we have done so over the years. But again, everything goes back to the mandate of the organization. We want to ensure that there's government accountability. You want to ensure that people are treated fairly. But how JFJ does that, it within a context of abuse by security forces, child rights, gender-based violence, and most recently, we focus on the matters of environmental rights. So we understand the challenges of civil servants, but it's not an area that JFJ would readily voice our opinions or any concern that we may have. Most recently, when it came to the issue of how the political directorate would have increased their own salaries, the area that JFJ perhaps would have publicly spoken about, and we didn't get the opportunity to, because you had another partner agency, Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, JAMP, through Jeanette Calder, who we believe spoke so well about it. I was actually down with the flu during that time as the organization's main spokesperson. But when we look at that particular area, the main issue of concern for JFJ would have been too much too soon, too much at once, and where's the accountability framework for the political directorate? Where was that independent review oversight that would have guided the process? What is the algorithm that was utilized to increase the salaries of the political directorate, versus those of teachers and so on? And I think public education was needed, because for some civil servants, they perhaps saw it as a wage increase rather than dealing with the issue of the different classifications and the categories of salaries, and how you're now merging those non-taxable portions with a taxable portion, and decreasing 185, I believe, salary bands into a lower amount. So I think public engagement and education was needed before the government embarked on the political directorate salary increase. But for us, simply put, accountability. And I've heard the Prime Minister, for example, spoke about accountability of the political directorate. And with the greatest of respect to the Prime Minister, some of those things that are being proposed, it already existed. Some of those things are what we call low-hanging fruits that should have been done.
Such as?
For example, what is the accountability for members of parliament who miss going to parliamentary sittings? There are systems in place to deal with that already. They should be going. That is how we hold our directorate accountable. That is how, as civil citizens, rather, we look on and say, okay, are the meetings starting on time? Who is present? Who is ensuring that the legislative review and oversight is being done? That is nothing new. Jeanette Calder, when she has been speaking on this matter, she made reference to a Carlstone report as far back as the 1990s that spoke about job descriptions and so on. Remember that the Prime Minister campaigned on this in 2016. To date, we have not been seeing it. So for me, those things are all well and good. But I believe that citizen accountability is what is also needed. And if you look at it within the context of constitutional reform, one of the basic things that we have not heard about is the right to recall. So for example, I vote you in, you work for me, I should be able to take you out of that parliament if you're not performing your duties before that 4 to 5 year time period.
What would have been a reasonable time though in terms of right of recall? Because they're there for 5 years. What would be a reasonable time to recall?
So it's not a time period per se, it's whether or not that person, that elected official that I placed to represent my duties, if it is that they're representing well, or if it is that they have done something that I believe is so untoward that I perhaps will need to remove it from Parliament before that 5 year period expires for our next general election. So there are different thought processes around a right to recall, whether or not that right to recall, similar to a by-election per se, whether it will be within the constituency that the MP represents, or whether it would be all of Jamaica would be voting for that MP to remain or to be removed. So these are the kind of things I'm saying that we need to have conversation around so citizens are aware of what we mean by electoral accountability.
All right, so we're not going directly into that yet.
Sure.
So let me understand though that you're not against the idea of salary increases.
Not at
you are
all.
more for the issue of accountability.
Yes, and I think that's what we all need to get into as citizens, because I think when we look at the fact that we have members of parliament over the years, other elected officials, other public servants who have been giving of themselves to the country, it's a job, but at the same time, it's a job that many of us do not want. I think we have to recognize that. And they have given themselves, and I think with that, one must be fairly compensated. Again, the issue for us when we look at it, too much, too soon, lack of public engagement, and again, the accountability systems and framework should have come into place. Because again, the government campaigned on these things, but you have not acted on it.
So
and that I think is the challenge.
What would have
well.
been a reasonable increase though, our target to look at?
For us, it's not a dollar value in terms of what is reasonable. It's the matter of independent oversight. Because what you have is a cabinet, and by virtue of us having a Westminster parliamentary system, it's a cabinet of a single political party that came together and said, this is what I'm recommending for us to get for a salary increase. The opposition say they were not consulted. I'm not even going to be getting into that aspect of it.
Initially, they didn't seem to be against.
As I'm saying, I don't want to get into the political side of it. That's not what JFJ does. The issue for us is, should there be an independent review panel that ensures that our political directorate, they're fairly compensated. And like all other civil servants, there is a time period within which that review must be done, and it's done in a manner that Jamaicans can have a sense of fairness is being exercised. I think that is the challenge that some people faced when they look at how it was done compared to how other civil servants deem themselves to have been treated.
So the argument then that you're putting forward is that there should have been an independent body that looks at the overall public sector compensation review.
No, for the political directorate specifically.
But why have it separate for the political directorate?
It's a matter of accountability and transparency. I am the executive director at Jamaicans for Justice. I will give oversight of the salaries of my staff members, and I will ensure that they're fairly treated and so on. But how can I be setting my own salary? That is where my board will be providing that oversight. And that is the difference which I urge people to look at.
Oh, see where I'm going in. So let's say, for example, you have PwC or Deloitte or one of those organizations, an independent organization that's mandated to look at this compensation review over a period of time and then make recommendations. So it wouldn't be left to the political directorate or anyone, because we recognize that, for example, the ministers' salaries are pegged to that of the permanent secretary.
Yes.
So you realize that there's some correlation between public sector and the parliamentarians.
And that can change, by the way. So there is nothing it's the same legislator. There is nothing that prevents the legislative body from going before Parliament and say, I am recommending this, or I'm acting on this recommendation from that independent body. But I think that sense of fairness was lacking because that independent review body did not exist for the political directorate. And remember now, to put in bigger context, this is a matter that has been long outstanding from as far back as the 1990s. I remember going to the university and studying, and I remember you had the transformation unit at the time looking at these very issues. So I think we have to commend the government of the day to have gotten the country to this stage. So I wouldn't want the political backlash to undermine the significant work that the government has done. But the point is that the government must always act in a way that people are assured that I am accountable to you, the citizen of Jamaica, and I'm acting in a way that is fair, and I'm acting in a way that is transparent. I think that's the essence of what we're all saying.
So then essentially, it's not enough to say that you are right or to be right. It's more than that. You need to prove that you are actually acting correctly.
Absolutely. You don't want to seem as if, because of public backlash, I'm going to be doing this. You want to seem as if, Jamaican people, I am listening to you and I'm acting in a way that represents your best interest and the best interest of the country, in a way that you can feel proud, in a way that you can say, yes, we are well deserving of this salary. I want to be able, when my child sees a member of parliament, to take picture with him in a similar way that they would take a picture with a Usain Bolt, because there is such reverence that we give to people who give of themselves. I think we have to get to that stage of respect of our parliamentarians and other public servants. But at this stage, when you look at the issue of the high levels of, or the perception rather, of corruption, when you look at how some parliamentarians behave in a way that we are not proud of, it undermines that respect that some Jamaicans will have for them.
All right, we go for our first break. You're watching The Conversation. We're looking at issues surrounding compensation review, after which we return with the constitutional reform. This is The Conversation. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to The Conversation, where we discuss a wide range of issues, least of which is the constitutional reform. We're now seated with Mickel Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. Just before the break, we looked at a number of things. One of the things that you said that stood out for me was the issue of John Public holding the members of parliament, yes, or the political directorate accountable. How does that look?
You know, for me, I like to start very basic with accountability. With accountability, the first thing is being in the know, having a sense of what is happening and what systems exist. Now, I teach political science in another life, and every semester I ask my students, what rights do you have? And they start quoting some rights that they heard of when they were watching Law and Order or some cable television show, like Sixth Amendment and right to bear arms. So when I actually show them the Jamaican Constitution and explain to them the rights that they have, so for example, some of them think that they have the right to education up to tertiary level. And I said, no, you have the right to education at the pre and primary levels. So I think some of those basic things we need to do better around, letting people be informed. Now, once people are informed and they know what exists, what their rights are, then you can start demanding accountability and transparency. What exactly does that mean? I mentioned one possibility with the right to recall earlier, but it starts also with electoral reforms, how we elect our members. Remember, we have a representative democracy. What does that mean? It means that we elect a set of people and they act in their best knowledge, their expertise of what they think we want as a people. So they make the laws, and we see where you have joint select committees and so on, and that's an opportunity for people to give a sense of input to these things, which goes back to the point of being in the know. So, for example, you have the Bail Act being reviewed right now. You have another piece of legislation around mandatory minimum sentence. Do we know what that means as Jamaican citizens? Are we sending our emails to the Minister of Justice? Are we sending our comments to the Joint Select Committee? Many of us, we don't do these things. So the right to know and having an opportunity to share our views are important. Because again, giving input to our elected representative is important. But if I were to change the Constitution, for example, through electoral reforms, I believe I should be able to elect my Senate. That's me personally. That's not a JFJ position here. We've not come to a conclusion. That's a sense of accountability. Because when I elect you, it means that you're accountable to me. You're not accountable to the political party that put you in the upper house, if you understand me, right? When it comes to your members of parliament now, it's a similar thing. While we elected them as members of parliament, sometimes I believe individuals act according to party lines, according to the party's policies, not necessarily to the needs of the citizens who elect them. So my question is, should we have a separation of how our members of parliament operate when they sit in the House of Representatives? What does that mean again? Should I separate my cabinet ministers from my members of parliament? In other words, I'm separating my executive branch of government from my legislative branch. And if that is done, perhaps people won't feel as if they're so beholden to the political party. Let me better explain. The executive branch, which is where your cabinet sit, you have a group of people who come together and say, these are the laws that I want to propose. These are the policies that I want to propose. And in that moment, they're acting on behalf of a single political party. When they go to parliament now and votes are being done on whether or not I pass this piece of legislation, you won't necessarily be having someone who may be aligned with the PNP or aligned with the JLP saying, you know, no, I won't vote in that particular manner. You're going to be seeing people vote, putting up their hands, knocking the benches and so on, and making all sorts of noises in the background according to political party lines, not necessarily to the views of you or the views of me.
So should I make the assumption, or based on what you have been saying, that right now what we have is a microcosm of the party's views being expressed, as opposed to a microcosm of the wider Jamaican society?
I genuinely believe so. And there's a terminology that I've always used. I believe right now, because we have a fusion of power, in other words, your executive branch and your legislative branch mix up, as my grandmother would say. Two of them are one and the same, right? I believe that your executive branch, which is where your prime minister and your cabinet sit, renders the legislative branch impotent. Why do I say that? Again, when laws are being made and policies are being promulgated, they're being done in a way that is along political party lines. And it happens when the People's National Party is also in power.
So there's no transparency?
There is no real accountability. And I say accountability now, even within the context of the elected officials. Who's going to be holding someone accountable when, for example, as a cabinet minister, so I don't support what my prime minister is saying, irrespective of the political party, I don't support it. Can I reasonably voice this? Or do I run the risk of my ministerial portfolio being removed from me? And we've heard prime ministers, if I recall, I think it was in Antigua, I don't want to misquote the country now, so let me take that back. But we've heard prime ministers across other Caribbean islands also say, make you not vote along what I want. This is a creature of the Westminster model, you know.
But then you're looking at something that demands it's culturally ingrained, firstly. So you're looking at a paradigm shift, a cultural change.
Absolutely.
All right, because generally persons get people in their political parties who are in line with or aligned to the particular objectives of the party beforehand. So it's not that I take you to this party because you're objective. I take you because you see things similarly to how this particular
party
party
But I may see things similar to you in terms of a broader mandate, a broader value system. It doesn't mean that every single policy that you're going to be pushing forward I will agree with.
Well, I doubt that
exactly, I'm always very cautious about collective responsibility. I believe in it in concept, but I don't think collective responsibility should take over my own moral standards and my conscience and my obligations and accountability to the Jamaican people who very well elected me.
Isn't there collective morality then?
It depends on the issue as well, because again, who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to the political party, or are you accountable to the people of Jamaica?
All right,
because remember, when you vote on election day, technically speaking, you're not voting for a political party. And I think we have to be mindful of things like that.
So let's segue now into constitutional reform. Jamaica is a very conservative country, to say the least. We have had a whole heap of back and forth with members of the public and different groups as it relates to how we have gone about electing persons to this committee. What are your views on that?
I think the horse has gone through the gate with those who are on the committee. So I would like us to revisit some of the structures of the past. And it can be done by way of looking at the 1990s. And by the way, the 1990s arguably so was a correction of the injustice done in the 1960s with how our constitution was adopted without public engagement. So how do we fix that problem now? The Constitutional Reform Committee that we currently have, our recommendation to them from Jamaicans for Justice is to establish working groups. And that working group structure will see different sectoral representation being engaged. And then they will report to members at the Constitutional Reform Committee. What does that mean? You perhaps would have trade unions who would meet, engage their members. Members from the media would meet and engage. Maybe you want press freedom in the Constitution. How do you voice those concerns to members of the Constitutional Reform Committee? I believe the working group will fix that problem. But beyond this structure of the Constitutional Reform Committee, however, I believe that we need improved public education, at least 1 year of it. Now we're having these conversations. How many Jamaicans understand what we're seeing? And it's not a case where they have an inability to understand, but no one is engaging them. Because I think sometimes those who have gone through the formal education system, we have almost this viewpoint, this stance, that people can't understand what we mean. And I believe if we break things down and speak to people, they will understand. Now, for me, I've listened to some of the town halls that have been had so far. And I don't believe that the public education that is currently undergoing is effective. So in other words, if you're going to be removing the monarchy, what are you going to be removing the monarchy with? That's something you have to come prepared to answer. Are you telling me that the average Jamaican man or woman don't understand that they don't want a president that will just come open parliament and come and cut some ribbons and so on? People looking on and say, but I want one president to go give me bang for my buck. You're telling me that the average Jamaican citizen can't understand that. I think we have to get to that stage where we engage people and ask the question, what sort of president would you want?
So the
what powers would you want?
So the town hall system, no, as you have said, or as you have seen it, is ineffective. That's what you're saying. How could we make that better?
I don't think it's effective because town halls, for example, I'm on social media a lot, and sometimes I see them being advertised. But the notice period, for example, it's too late. I don't know, and I stand corrected by the ministry, whether or not we have your town criers driving up and down in these communities. The Constitutional Reform Committee will be near you, just like how you see the Devon House truck driving up and down with the music in the communities. How do we do some of those things? Have we placed flyers out? Do we have a schedule of public engagement? Do we tell people what we're going to be speaking about? Are we just going to these town hall and just talk about anything that comes to people's mind? Or are we saying we're going to be looking at removing the monarchy? Removing the monarchy with what? We're going to be looking at entrenched provision. What that mean for the average Jamaican citizen, though, God? We have to be asking ourselves these real questions, you know.
But then another question that we might need to throw in the mix. Are Jamaicans really interested in that kind of, well, are they interested? Are we interested in constitutional reform to begin with?
You know, I say always that when we ask that question, we always have to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to get people interested in these things? I have a teenage son, And when I explain these things to him, he says, but mommy, so we not forget without the Governor General then, man? When I explain to him the dollar value of what we're paying, when I explain to him the matter of human dignity as an independent sovereign country, what that means, when I explain to him that when you vote in, you can't vote out, you have to wait until the next election. And he asks me, but if I don't like the Prime Minister, what do I do? If I don't like this person, what do I do? And I said, son, you have to wait 5-year period. But he said, that's not fair. This is a 14-year-old child. So you're telling me that the average Jamaican citizen who may not know if these things are adequately explained, you're telling me that they won't understand it. The matter of interest is another conversation. However, the matter of knowledge and interest, it's two different issues. But I ask the question again, would the public education fix that challenge? You know, I've looked back on videos of the 1960s when we got independence. And again, I'm a student of politics. And I can't wait to be rid of the monarchy. Because I remember a few months ago, it was Clyde Williams, that the attorney at law and social media. He gave public awareness to the symbol that the Governor General wears. And it was a white man stomping on a black man. When you zoom it in, that's what you're seeing. That's what the Governor General was wearing up to recent times. So you're telling me that that didn't cause any upset, any outrage in Jamaicans to say something is wrong with this structure. We need to be truly independent. Because I don't want us to insult people to think that they don't understand. Because yes, there is apathy generally. You see it at the polls. The last general election, it was 37%. But maybe this is where public officials need to take stock and say, am I doing enough to build the confidence and trust in the Jamaican citizenry?
So my question based on that, because you just stated this general sense of apathy, the fact that 37% turn out to vote, it literally means that we probably don't care about these things because we don't see the immediate implications or benefits from them. If I'm supposed to be in politics then, what need or what desire should I have to ensure that more of those persons decide to get interested, because they might not want to vote for me because my views might not be aligned to what they're saying? So wouldn't it be in my best interest to maintain the status quo?
Maybe for some it would be. But, you know, I don't think there's a simple fix to the issue because some things will require changes over time.
You're talking about cultural shifts.
Absolutely.
That's what we're looking at.
So, you know, as I said, for me as a parent, I have these conversations with my child. And I also, much to the chagrin of his friends, I bring them in and I speak to several of them as well. And I explain to them. And that sense of civic pride is something that will start from very young. It goes back to the conversation, what about civics in school? It goes back to the conversation about our children knowing their rights, their responsibilities, and what constitutional provisions exist. It goes back to the conversation, can your child or your niece, your nephew, your cousin, name at least 3 ministers that sit in the cabinet? I have friends who can't.
All right, we go to our next break.
Sure.
You're watching The Conversation. I'm Kwame Thomas. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break,
Yes.
you started elaborating on the fact that many of your friends don't know who are the members of parliament.
Embarrassingly enough.
And then you threw back to the whole idea of civics in school.
Yes.
And all of that. Would that help? Do you think that would help though?
Absolutely. You know, as I said, I teach politics part-time, and I'm proud that I've had students who passed the class, even those who didn't get the grades that they wanted, would call and say, Miss Jackson, you know, I was watching the news last night, and I have to go vote next election, because they have never voted before. So I think by having and instilling that sense of nationalism, it makes a difference in people. I believe that we need to do a little bit more community-led engagements. So for example, JFJ, when we do our justice tours, we go out in the communities and we tell people about the rights that they have. And they will say, Miss, you know, the other day this happened, and by the way, it never is within the mandate of the organization. They bring it down a path about everything that they believe needs to be improved with Jamaica, because we love our country and we want to see the best version of it. But I think people are interested in knowing. It's just a matter of how we engage people. So I'm a firm believer in that, and I think our political parties, they ought to do better, because political parties, despite the general sense, they're not here just to win elections. They're here to advance policies that are here for the betterment of all of us, and they're also here to do public education on issues. So one of my biggest disappointment right now, even within the context of constitutional reform, say whatever opinions we have on the committee and the process that is being done, where are the political parties? Where are the youth organizations in sharing knowledge among those that it represents? I think we need to do better.
So couldn't we argue then that Jamaicans for Justice perhaps might need to just broaden the mandate a little to include some of these things?
You know, when people talk about broaden the mandate, I have 12 staff members, but we have risen to the occasion. Last year, we actually launched a little Know Your Rights booklet, because that is within the mandate of the organization, ensuring that every Jamaican citizen, within our ability at JFJ, we engage them through public education. We actually have a weekly radio show called Let's Start Justice, where we talk about all of these issues. So we're doing our part, but it all goes back to resources and what we can do. So we have to be looking at all the different players and what we all can collectively do.
All right, so I remember earlier, in one of the earlier segments, I spoke about the fact that Jamaica is at the very best a conservative country, and there have been groups that have been lobbying for the removal of particular individuals from the Constitutional Reform Committee. What's your view on that?
You're talking the church groups and
church groups,
okay,
among others, and they called specifically for the removal of one individual, saying that long and short, one bad apple spoils the bunch. Professor Albert Richard Albert.
Yes.
They had asked for him to be removed because his views are not aligned with those of many other groups here. What are your views on that?
I think I can understand if people raise an objection to who they deem to be a foreigner on a process that should be nationally owned. That I could understand. But I can't accept any criticism that would suggest that currently 14 other members who sit on that committee are so intellectually weak-minded that they can't express themselves and stand up for what they believe in. So I can't accept that criticism, and I think it is offensive to those who I personally admire. Dr. Lloyd Barnett, for example. You're telling me that these individuals, our Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs and others, are going to be sitting there and this so-called outsider will just be telling them what to do. I can't understand that criticism at all. My concern, however, is that public officials, including the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, and if memory serves me correct, the Minister of Information, came out to say that church groups, you have nothing to fear. We won't be going down that line. And I have a concern for that. Because if it is that this process is driven by consensus and real participation, how can such a pronouncement be made that we won't be touching on these issues? So in other words, before the process even starts, you're excluding how minority groups may very well feel. These people are Jamaicans.
What are those issues again?
For example, the matter of abortion and buggery being removed. Those were the concerns that the church groups had raised. And if it is that our public officials are saying to the church, let me assure you, you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to worry about, we won't be touching that, then there is no consensus as far as I'm concerned, because you've already closed the door on a conversation that has not yet been had. And I have a problem with that. I think the process has to be open, where those who would want those issues to be addressed feel as if when they make their submissions to the committee, it will be treated in a way that is fair and unbiased. And I think we have to leave space for that.
So that's how consensus would look?
Absolutely. Do you think, for example, and I hate asking leading questions, but let me throw it back at you. If the government is telling you that I won't be touching on right to recall and impeachment from day one, do you feel as if you would need to speak at all, if that is an issue of concern for you?
Possibly not. I might want to interrogate though and find out why.
Oh.
So wouldn't that be a good approach to take?
I think for people who have been victimized simply because of who they are, women who I've worked with, some of whom were raped and were pregnant as a result, I don't think they should be forced to ask any government official why you're blocking my views before the process starts. I can't accept that. It's a democratic country. And in any event, we're not a state that is governed by the church. And I have colleagues within the church who I respect. So my comments ought not to be seen as an attack on the church at all. My comments are to be seen that this is a process that must be transparent and open and based on a real consensus-orientated approach.
So do you think, though, somehow, couldn't this be just a response to what might seem as public outrage? Because it wouldn't just be, we know Jamaica, and we'd listen to the songs every day and all of that. It wouldn't necessarily just be the views of the church, but it might just be public outrage, and in an effort to quell that, you just say these things. Could that be?
I understand how the public may feel, and I also understand that the political directorate, they have a responsibility to all Jamaican citizens, including our minority groups. And therefore, one must be circumspect in what they say and how they say it, as not to exclude those who have already been marginalized simply because of who they are and simply because of the views one holds. That's my opinion on the matter.
All right, so do we expect, or should we expect in the future, a louder voice from JFG as it relates to some of these things that it might appear as though the government is saying that we're not going to look at these things, so you have no fear? Should we expect to hear more from JFG as it relates to pushing these things forward?
No, Jamaicans for Justice, we stand up for the rights of all Jamaican citizens. We believe that the views of the majority is important, but we do not believe that the rights of minority groups ought to be silenced. So our opinion on the matter of abortion and buggery and so on, we don't think that the legislative framework should infringe on people's individual choices, should infringe on people's right to privacy. However, very broadly speaking, we will be making a submission to the Constitutional Reform Committee on the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms to ensure that some of the rights that we're not currently seeing and some of those rights that were proposed in the 1990s are revisited. For example, the right to education, I think it needs to be increased from pre and primary levels. Personally for me up to tertiary level, but as an organization we haven't come to a consensus as to whether secondary or tertiary. I think the right to health, similar to what Guyana has as one of our neighboring countries, should be in our Jamaican constitution. I think we need to look at other minority groups such as the disability community to ensure that their fundamental rights and freedoms are so protected from discrimination. So it's a broad conversation to be had, but JFJ, we speak for every single Jamaican. Even the issues that are controversial, we support all minority groups.
All right, so the issue now of crime, of violence, yes. We have not said much on that. We have not, well, I personally, and forgive me if that's not the case, but I haven't heard much being said from the perspective of Jamaicans or justice. Or crime data, it has been stated that it has dipped. Yes. But we haven't heard anything from JFJ. Is it that you don't trust the data? Because last year when it went up, we heard something. So
you know, I'm happy to be seated here. And I've always challenged my media colleagues, because the media will always call you when they get spicy news in their opinion. Let's call JFJ and JFJ will speak. So I challenge my media colleagues. Did we get any phone calls when the crime rate?
Well, you're here. You're here now.
So we're here now.
Yes.
But I like to make that public challenge as well, because we do issue press releases on issues. But I want to make it very clear. This is not a matter of whether or not we trust the data. We have to always act on the premise that our institutions and those who work within those institutions are acting in a way with integrity. And on that basis, we see no reason to say that the data isn't what it is. Now, when it comes to the matter of crime and violence, we have been speaking actually, and we have been trying to get data because we like to speak from a place of evidence. So we have been reaching out to different state institutions, for example, the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, the Ministry of National Security, to get a sense of what are those social interventions that you're doing, how effective are they, are we seeing the type of outcome that we would want. For example, from an infrastructural standpoint, do we see more football fields and other community clubs and so on in some of the at-risk communities? What are some of those income-generating programs that are happening? What is happening in the schools? What is the relationship between the Ministry of Justice's Restorative Justice Program and the Ministry of Education? We have been very consistent on these issues when we speak. So to answer the question simply, we spoke then and we speak now on the matters of crime, and ensuring that all Jamaicans and the rights of Jamaican citizens are protected. Sometimes you may not hear us publicly speaking on issues, but remember, a lot of the work that we do, it may not always be in the media. A lot of the work that we do also includes providing legal support to people who have had their rights violated. So we have attorneys right now who are before the courts protecting people's rights that were violated. We have our policy specialist who's right now reviewing some of those legislation that the government is proposing to ensure that when we speak, we can make suggestions for improvement.
All right, we go to our final break. This is The Conversation. We're looking at crime and violence with Mickel Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. So just before the break, again, crime and violence, and I've been looking at, and even while we spoke during the break, for the past 2 decades,
yes,
our crime rate has been, well, the average crime rate is above 1,300. Do you think that we're doing enough as a nation to tackle this beast that's crime?
Absolutely not. I think successive governments across both political parties have tried, in their mind, solutions that have consistently failed. This hard policing measure that we see. We have the 1970s Gun Court Act. We saw the 70s state of emergency and how that was even used as a political tool in the 70s. The same Bail Act that we're reviewing now, by the way, the government tried it in the 2000s and the Privy Council ruled several aspects of those unconstitutional. We've seen what happened with Tivoli incursion, for example. 14 years is the anniversary, well, 2010, 20-something years. May 23rd is another year that we celebrate. Still no, well, not celebrate, observe rather. Still no accountability in terms of police reform. So we have tried tools that have not worked. Just this morning, I saw a headline. I think it was, I don't remember which newspaper. A family in the inner city saw 2 doctors and a teacher. And I looked at it and I say, this is what education and opportunity gives you. 2 doctors and a teacher. That is to be celebrated irrespective of the social class that one is from. And I asked myself the question, what more can be done in the communities that are affected by crime? I've had the opportunity to do engagement, and I won't name any of the schools, within Denham Town, Tivoli Gardens, and so on, with students. And they said, Miss, we're not thinking about certain things because we don't trust this person. Nobody no business about we. This is the mindset of our youngsters. How do we get them to see that, yes, someone cares about you, and that care will be demonstrated by resources going to the schools, by resources ensuring that the children in some of these schools have an equal pathway to other schools that are better resourced. So I reject, for example, this thing that says every single high school must get the same money. No, 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 no. You must get based on what the needs are, where those communities are. I think the parents of those children also need more and better social protection mechanism. I say this to say that many reports have indicated that social protection and improved systems at education levels are needed. But you don't see some of those inputs and investment being made to the level that one would want. And this is not something that we will fix overnight. It will take decades, but we must start somewhere in a level or at a level where we can say, yes, the government is trying. The government is working with the teachers. The government is working within the communities. But the hard policing measures that we have been seeing championed from the government, this is not it.
So you're saying that we should do away with the hard policing. Is that what you're saying?
I believe that the results of the hard policing have shown that it doesn't work. So I think comprehensive approach is needed. For example, I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to see the expo from the Jamaica Constabulary Force recently. It was a lovely display. We saw body-worn cameras. We saw technology that will do facial recognition. A lot of excitement. Children went there and they had fun. My question is, how many of those technologies have been deployed and are being utilized in crime fighting? That's where we need to go. Ensure that our police force is equipped to do their jobs. So I'm not saying it's an either or. I'm saying it's a comprehensive approach that must be taken, that looks at the social side of things, that looks at the empowerment of our youngsters, and so on. And let me give you a simple thing. I tell you, I have a teenage son. He says to me, Mommy, you know, some of my friends who have to take the bus and so on, they said some big man in the community is trying to engage them. I said, what do you mean? Trying to engage the youngsters into scamming. And my son said to me, when I look at you as a hardworking mother and so on, you think your old car is something that I will look forward to being and so on. This is the kind of joke my son and I have, because you're seeing now the quick, get rich approach happening in the songs and on the TV and so on. People posing up beside them Benz, and they're doing some of these things through a lot of scamming. So for a child who does not have parental guidance, for a child who does not believe that the system is there for them, who do you think that child will very well listen to? The parent like me who drive the old car, or the nice lot of scammers now with the Benz and the BMWs and so on, that in their minds giving them a life that they think is easier to achieve. You don't have to worry about the CXC subjects and so on, because see the Benz here from the lot of scamming. These are the realities. And what is the government doing? And what support are we giving to the parents so that we can better support our children?
So that task is committed solely to the government?
Absolutely not. That's why I talk about parents as well. But let's not kid ourselves. We have seen where children are having children. We have the National Parenting Commission, for example. What sort of programs are they doing to equip parents to have certain conversations? Now, I have conversations with my child about career counseling, career pathway. How many parents have that capacity and that ability to have that sort of conversation? So I don't want people to misunderstand me to say that everything must lie with the government. That's not what I'm saying. But the point here is that Jamaica's gotten to a stage wherein socially we need to improve. Socially, we must recognize that you have 14 and 15-year-olds having children. What support will be done to empower them, to empower their children? So I think it's a multi-pronged approach that requires the participation of every single Jamaican citizen. But at the end of the day, with all reality, the state will always face the greater burden in getting the job done.
So you're saying that we're not beyond repair. We are close enough to the edge, but we're not beyond repair. That's what you're saying.
If ever I thought that we were beyond repair, I would have to resign from JFJ as the executive director. I believe in Jamaica. I believe we can get there. I just think it needs all hands on deck.
All hands on deck. So it's interesting to hear all these things that you have been saying. So hard policing by itself is not going to give us the answers that we want and the results that we want. Social intervention programs, social empowerment programs will not give us the results. So you're saying a multi-pronged approach.
Yes.
All right. Now, in the normal scheme of things, and again, I'm throwing it back to Jamaicans for Justice, because sometimes many of the groups that we have in society seem to react to the issues. But what is it that JFJ can do to show that they are proactive, not reactive to the issues, but they can be proactive in this approach where they can actually bring persons to the table to have that discussion so that we can look at crime and violence and take a proactive approach to it?
I'll answer that question in two ways. To say that as civil society organizations, we can do so much and no more. Because our responsibility, and depending on the mandate, for JFJ, it's accountability. It's responding on behalf of Jamaicans who can't speak for themselves. Again, the greater responsibility will always be the government. We have to get to that mindset, because if we don't, then we almost give up. And then we as citizens, all of us, we don't hold the government accountable. What can JFJ do? When we look, for example, on children who are in conflict with the law, JFJ, we have gone to worked with the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, for example. We have done social justice trainings and initiatives with wards of the state. We have done what we can within our mandate, and we try to scale up where feasible. We go into the communities and we do that work. We read the pieces of legislation, read the international treaties to which Jamaica is a signatory, and we say to the government, this is what we're proposing. So if you remember, for example, Armadale is what we are observing 14 years. My predecessor, Roger Malcolm, and the team, Monique Long and others, Nastasia Robinson, I have to call the names because these people worked tirelessly in getting the revision or review of these pieces of legislation done. We have done extensive pieces of work. I'm not sure if you remember, for example, just recently, Minister Morgan, Robert Morgan, quoted and said that he read a few of JFJ's proposals over the years. We have written to the minister, the current Minister of Education, Favour Williams, to say that we're here to support wherever we can. In some instances, we haven't gotten a response from some of the ministers, but we're here and we lend our support where we can, in the best way we can, by saying that these are some of the proposals, these are the gaps that we have in law, and this is what we're proposing to the government to do to fix those gaps. You talk about crime and violence, for example, because we have our ears on the ground in some of these communities. We have people who say, yes, I would be willing to speak, but when I speak, who's going to protect me? So we have said one of the solutions that we must look at is to ensure that our witness protection program is improved. More resources. Our Prime Minister was at a CARICOM meeting recently. I asked the question, what is being done at the CARICOM level, wherein the witness protection relocation program is not only within a Jamaican context, but you have that sort of agreement across the Caribbean where we can have witnesses here and they can take some of our witnesses in their country so people are better protected. So these are some of the things that we have to start looking at.
So your argument is that the fact that crime is transnational, then the approach to crime should also be transnational.
You must. You absolutely must get to that stage. And I think my disappointment when I look even at the conversation of regionalism, which is another segment that we don't have, is that we need to do a little bit better at transnational crime and a better partnership. It already exists with the CARICOM agreement. Security is a major underpinning. I just don't think our Caribbean leaders have done enough to have that partnership. So I was heartened by the meeting that was had, a few areas of concern when I hear them bashing the judiciary and calling for death penalty and so on. But again, that's another conversation. But I was happy that the meeting was had, and I look forward to concrete actions coming from our respective Caribbean leaders going forward.
But that idea of calling for the death penalty, that might actually be an issue of, well, reaction again, frustration, and so on. But what would a better approach be?
I think we should always focus on preventing crime from occurring in the first place.
Well, it has happened, and it cost X amount to house a prisoner.
So it's two things. Crime prevention has to be done. So it goes back to preventing them from happening, talking to our youngsters, and so on. Death penalty, there's no evidence that it deters any crime. So from a JFJ standpoint, we don't believe that the state should be in the business of killing people, especially when you have a justice system that is flawed and may make mistakes. And I tell you, you can say sorry to someone who was behind bars and later found innocent. You can compensate. You can't bring back the dead. So we should always look at it within the context that, listen, we have a flawed system, mistakes will be made, and death is final. So there are several human rights perspectives why JFG, we don't support death penalty. And there are also practical reasons as well why we don't support it. And the practical reason, as I stated earlier, there is nothing that suggests any single country that is a democratic one that suggests that death penalty deters crime. None. Absolutely none. And I challenge anybody to bring their statistics to say otherwise.
All right, so I think we are at the end of our program, and I want to thank you for a very robust discussion. I'm looking forward to have another discussion such as this with you again. There you have it. This has been The Conversation, where we looked at a wide variety of issues with Mickel Jackson, the Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice. For The Conversation, I am Kwame. Have a good one.